good morning and welcome to this conversation with my friend, the Right Honourable David Lammy, the UK Foreign Secretary. I'm Michael Fullilove. I'm the Executive Director of the Lowy Institute. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which the Institute stands, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders. Ladies and gentlemen, it's impossible to think of two countries with more in common than Australia and the United Kingdom. We share a language, a history, and a sense of humour. We're both old democracies and free societies. Our servicemen and women have fought alongside each other from the Boer War to the Iraq War. And Australians feel very warm towards the United Kingdom. In this year's Lowy Institute poll, 85% of Australians said they trust the UK to act responsibly in the world. Our country's strategic interests are also interlinked. We trade with each other, we do business with each other, our diplomats work closely together. In the secret world, we share intelligence through the Five Eyes. And perhaps most significantly, Orcus is a signal of our country's shared ambition to shape our environment and contribute to a stable balance of power. In this context, it's a real pleasure to welcome David Lammy to the Institute. I interviewed David last May when he was in opposition, and one point I made to him was that the last time a Labor Foreign Secretary visited Australia was 1966. He promised that he would break that streak, so thank you, David, for keeping your promise, and I'm taking credit for your visit. David was elected as the member for Tottenham in 2000, so he recently marked his quarter century in Parliament, hard Labor. He served in a number of portfolios in the Blair and Brown governments and in opposition. And after Keir Starmer's impressive win last year, David was appointed Secretary of State for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs. All right, well, you're going to be talking today. You're not going to be listening too much. I'm going to come back to Iran and the United States and the administration. But let me maybe just start with the Australia relationship, seeing as you're here and you've broken that streak. Yesterday, you participated in the...
I've got to tell you, by the way, I am shocked that it's 1966 since the Labour Foreign Secretary was here, and I'm determined to come back during my period as Foreign Secretary so I can say I did it twice,
right,
so that nobody can beat me.
Right. Well, I'm going to take credit for that.
Yeah.
All right, so let me ask you, yesterday you had your discussions with your Defence Secretary colleague and with Penny Wong and Richard Marles, and the big announceable was a 50-year bilateral Orcus treaty, which is great, but it's also unusual because Orcus is a trilateral deal. So what was the point of Australia, what was the thinking behind Australia and the UK signing a bilateral deal on Orcus? Are you coming to the rescue because the Americans are losing interest in AUKUS or what?
No. We have, between our countries, a phenomenal shared history. We have live, as we speak, an intelligence capability that keeps the world safe and is another huge privilege of the role that I do on behalf of the intelligence community in the UK, working in partnership with Australia. And of course, we also have this phenomenal military capability. And the deal that the Defence Secretary has signed today, in the end, is about 20,000 jobs between our two countries. And it sets up a partnership way beyond the generation in this room. So that's what it's about. But of course, it involves our fundamental partnership with the United States and the capability that exists across our three nations.
We know that the Pentagon's in the middle of a review into AUKUS. How would you make the argument to the Americans as to why AUKUS makes sense for them? And also, how would you make the argument about why it makes sense for Australia to have nuclear-powered submarines to those on the left in Australia who might say, well, why do we want to get into this? Why do we want to quicken our connections with the Americans at this time? Why does it make sense?
The first thing to say is all governments do reviews. and should do reviews, particularly when they involve big aspects of procurement and defence, and particularly because we are having this interview at a heightened moment, clearly, of security and defence issues globally. We just had Stephen Ludgrove look carefully at Orcus. The Australian government did this in their first administration. And of course, it's right that the Trump administration do a review and flush out any issues for them. I think that this is important in part because of the importance of the Indo-Pacific region. Two, because in reflecting on the capability across our three nations, we should be minded to ensure that we are sharing technological benefit across our countries, bringing down barriers, and for Australia having stealth capability, I think is a fundamental for security in this region. This is a phenomenal country with phenomenal skills, both in tech and in defence, but it's in a a neighbourhood with challenges, and so for all of those reasons, with Australia clearly with two central security relationships with the United States and the UK, I think that this is the right capability. And I also think behind this, as I say, are communities in places like Perth, places like Barrow, and a whole supply chain that ensures young people and families have employment for years ahead and play a big role, as they have done in the past, in not just keeping our own people safe, but keeping the neighbourhood and the global community safe.
All right, I want to ask you a few questions about the United States, which is the key security guarantor both for your country and for mine. President Trump has just landed in Scotland. It seems to me that the Brits have been pretty effective in building a relationship with President Trump. We know that he likes the royals. Keir Starmer has established a rapport. As you may know, Prime Minister Albanese hasn't met President Trump yet. The Americans haven't appointed an ambassador to Australia. I think we need your help. What's your advice on establishing a relationship with the Trump administration?
Australia doesn't need the UK's help and doesn't need my advice. Some of this is about cycles. I remember when I was sitting with President Trump. He wasn't president at that stage, but I was with Keir Starmer in Trump Tower back in September of last year. And we were having a meal in Trump Tower, and he was obviously focused and hoping that he would win the election in the United States. But we had won our election in the UK, and he was really focused on the numbers, how we had won, how we had centred growth and migration as central issues, and how we had appealed to parts of the industrial north that we had lost. We were fortunate that our election cycle was such that we were in post, we were engaged with Donald Trump, but we were engaged with him out of office. And, governments always appreciate it when you're engaging with them and they're not in office. So I don't need to give Australia advice. What has happened in this election cycle in Australia is extraordinary. It's history making. That in of itself will be of interest and is of interest, I think.
Because President Trump likes
globally, he likes winners.
Yeah.
The numbers are phenomenal, and he's an Anglophile. He's actually there was some commentary that had Kamala Harris won the election, she would have been the first US president who had very little sensibility of the UK and, you know, the kind of, you know, the Anglophile sphere. Donald Trump is not that. He has a powerful sense, starts with his Scottish mother. He talks about her a lot. Mm-hmm. He's there in Scotland today. Yeah. I think Australia will feel a kind of embrace. There's a sort of familiarity, notwithstanding the day-to-day of politics and all the rest of it.
All right, let me ask you about JD Vance, because you've had an unusual perspective. I think you met him at the Munich Security Conference. I think it was last year. I think when I first met you, you were on a stage with JD.
Before that, actually.
Year before that, all right. What are your impressions of him? Because he's obviously an interesting interlocutor.
JD is one of those politicians who clearly has a public persona, but his private persona is very personable. He has a fierce intellect. You know, he went to Yale. He's a very bright guy, very curious, very interesting. He's young, you know, he's 40 and has achieved the giddy heights of vice president. And what I think our connection is, we both come from very humble working class backgrounds. We both have aspects of, you know, not just working class, but you know, my father had a problem with alcohol. JD had a mother with addiction issues. So dysfunction, overcoming aspects of real challenge in our backgrounds, and he's got a powerful Christian faith, as have I, and so there's a bond, and my politics has always been on the moderate end of the Labour family, and I'd like to think that people would say in the Westminster Village, you know, I don't always agree with David Lammy, but he's a nice guy, and I'm able to forge friendships beyond my political tribe, and so he's definitely one to watch.
I was really struck by the speech that you gave last year at the Security Council. And I remember the Russian permanent representative or foreign minister was scrolling on his phone while you were speaking. And you said, and I'm going to quote it, "I speak not only as a Briton, as a Londoner and as a foreign secretary, but I say to the Russian representative on his phone as I speak that I stand here also as a black man whose ancestors were taken in chains from Africa at the barrel of a gun to be enslaved, whose ancestors rose up and fought in a great rebellion of the enslaved, imperialism. I know it when I see it." So what would it mean for the world if this act of imperialism by Russia were to succeed?
I'm reading at the moment and watching at the moment Man in a High Castle, which is a dystopian take on what might have happened had the Nazis and the Japanese in that era won the Second World War. And I always feel slightly guilty when a journalist says, "What are you reading for pleasure?" Because it's like, how serious is this foreign secretary? But I'm finding this dystopian take really interesting, and you know, it's a bad place when big countries think that it's a good idea, or they can invade and take over their small neighbors. And part of what we set up after the Second World War was a rules-based order in which that would not happen any longer. And if Putin's imperialist ambitions were able to succeed, like night follows day, there's a kind of domino effect across much of the globe. In South America, my family are originally from Guyana. Venezuela would quite like half of Guyana. Surprise, surprise, Guyana discovered a lot of oil 5 years ago. Venezuela are renewing, they want the whole half of the country that's got the oil. Thank you very much, says Maduro. And so this leads to a knock-on effect. It's got to be put down.
All right, you mentioned the Middle East, so let's come to that part of the world. And you mentioned earlier that the discussions you had with the Iranians and also with Marco Rubio about the strikes. A few weeks on, a month on maybe, how effective do you think President Trump's strikes were against the Iranian nuclear program? And how do we lock in the gains that were achieved through diplomacy?
Well, this is a live discussion. Today, there is a meeting which I brokered in a conversation with the Iranian foreign minister just over a week ago, where I urged him to come back to a negotiated path on Iran's nuclear ambitions. And I urged him, alongside my French and German counterpart, the so-called E3 of nations, to get serious about talks and about their nuclear ambitions, because if they did not, we would snap back on the JCPOA agreement that we struck with them, and that would hit them with global sanctions right across the UN system. And I'm very pleased that they are meeting today with our European technical team to get into those negotiations. And we are obviously linked with the United States. It's hugely important that Iran meets with the United States as quickly as possible, intensifies conversations with the United States as well. And the reason for that is because we are really clear. In terms of enriched uranium for civilian use, we've got sites like Sellafield in the UK, where the enriched uranium is between 3 and 5%. Why does Iran need enriched uranium of 60%? I mean, for what possible use could you need that unless you want military nuclear capability? And we can't have Iran have military nuclear capability. The assessment of the action that was taken by the United States is ongoing, and no doubt it's degraded Iranian capability to some extent. But it is also the case that once you have enriched, once the scientists have been able to do that in your country, then that knowledge is there. And by the way, we need to get the inspectors back in, and we need to know where that 60% is in Iran. So this is a live, immediate, serious challenge. It's a pressing challenge, and the UK is playing its part in ensuring that we sort this problem out. And ultimately, it's a problem that is best sorted out diplomatically, precisely because once you have enrichment, then to that degree, you need the framework to ensure that does not turn into military capability.
President Macron announced this week that France will recognise a Palestinian state when he goes to the UNGA in September. Was that helpful? What sort of difference would that make to the humanitarian situation on the ground?
Well, I think that the commitment to two states is fundamental. Two states that are able to live side by side with Israelis safe and secure, and not worried by rockets being fired into Tel Aviv and hostages being grabbed in the night But also the Palestinian cause is a just cause. And I worry greatly about those who seem to believe that we can either have no state or one state. No, two states is the way, and therefore my party, this is a cross-party position in the UK. Palestinian recognition is a just cause. We desire it, but it's important that it contributes to those two states. And I think the debate about when has been about, is this a symbolic act, or is it actually an act that tips this towards two state and towards these two states living side by side in peace? And the pressing issue at the moment, I think, is getting those hostages out. You know, I sat with hostage families, and you know, the emotions of your loved one emaciated somewhere under a tunnel in Gaza, and the pressing issue is the horrors that we're seeing. The starvation, the malnourishment, children waiting for food, being killed. I think this is offending the global community. We need a ceasefire. We need a ceasefire, and we've been pressing the Israeli governments because we warned them that the aid system that they had come up with could not and would not work, and that is what is coming to pass.
All right, let me come to this part of the world. Let me ask you about China. You've mentioned China a few times, and you visited China as Foreign Secretary. I think all of us envisage a blend of cooperation and competition with China. Prime Minister Albanese was just in Beijing, where he saw Xi Jinping, and they had a warm conversation. But it's always complicated with China, because at the same time that the world was watching President Trump monster President Zelensky in the Oval Office, Australians were watching in split screen as the PLA Navy circumnavigated our continent. So the Chinese are always pressuring states in the Pacific and pressuring us as well. So I guess the question is, from the UK's perspective, what is the balance between competition and cooperation in your relationship with China?
Well, we have had an oscillating policy towards China. It was only a decade ago that David Cameron and George Osborne, when they were running the UK, were declaring a golden age with China. We then bounced to different positions under Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. So we've bounced around in the UK, and what we said, and I formed this in opposition, is that we wanted a consistent position on China, where we would cooperate where we can, but we would absolutely challenge where we must. And there are a whole list of issues that we challenge China on. We've challenged China on the political motivated imprisonment of Jimmy Lai. We challenged China on their espionage in the UK. We hugely are concerned about the sanctioning of members of parliament. We have big issues with transnational repression. I put out a statement yesterday on this, and the treatment of Hong Kong nationals. So we have very tough issues that I have raised continually with Wang Li and the Chinese. But on climate, world health, and of course areas of trade that do not pertain to security. These are areas where we want to cooperate and we want to do more, and we want to be able to have conversations with China that might lead to change positions on some of the things that we take issue with.
I think you referred a bit earlier to authoritarian countries working together more closely. We've certainly seen the Chinese and the Russians, but especially in Washington, they often talk about the CRINCs, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. How close do you think that partnership is? How much of a concern is that?
Oh, well, I've seen it. You know, I've been in Kyiv. I've seen the shells that have come from North Korea killing Europeans. I've seen the kit, dual-use technology supplied by the Chinese. I gave the Chinese a list of companies that are supplying Putin with this stuff, and I sanctioned those companies. And we know Iran has also had a hand, and there are partnerships that are forged across boundaries. So this is happening as we speak. And we have to be really vigilant, really tough about that axis that is emerging. And then alongside that, we have real threats to our cybersecurity. And we have this kind of hybrid attacks on our democracy, stoking division in our democracies, destabilizing countries and their democratic norms and systems, attacking public institutions, bringing down and going after systems in all of our economies. So this is serious stuff. One of the huge privileges of being a UK Foreign Secretary and is that we have, and this is something that I'm so proud that we do with our Australian friends, we still have across the Five Eyes system the best intelligence capability in the world. And I have huge respect for our intelligence agencies and the people that work in them who do so much to keep our people safe. And it's a huge privilege as UK Foreign Secretary to have part of that architecture that falls under the Foreign Office. They do a tremendous job, and they obviously keep me pretty up to date with some of what these autocracies are up to.
And by the way, you've just appointed a new chief of MI6 who's the first female, she'll be the first female C, right?
Blaze, yeah.
Yeah.
She's going to be terrific.
And previously she was Q in MI6, she was a quartermaster.
She was.
All right, I'm extracting a bit of secret information here. All right, who would like to ask the Foreign Secretary a question? If you'd like to, I want to squeeze in as many questions as I can. So I'm going to ask you to keep it short and make sure it's a question. I'll ask this gentleman on the corner, if you could just wait for a microphone, sir.
Thanks. My question relates to this part of the world. We're on the doorstep of ASEAN. It'll be the fourth or third largest economy within just a few years. Indonesia is 60% of that. This is an area where we are lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and it screams enormous opportunity. I would love to hear your thoughts on what the UK and Australia could do to partner more in terms of seizing some of those opportunities for economic growth, but also for more defence cooperation. Thanks.
Well, that's a wonderful question. It was a privilege to be at the ASEAN summit a few weeks ago with Penny Wong, to be there for the second time, and to demonstrate the UK's commitment to the region. And in my visits to Malaysia, to Indonesia, to Laos, we are doing incredible things, particularly on energy and climate in partnership across the region. We're having detailed conversations around defense issues across the region, and that, you know, a lot of those countries are wanting the capability and the support of our defense sector, particularly. And there are really good debates and discussions and opportunities around growth, leaning into higher education and skills in the UK particularly, but also the debates that and the capacity that countries are wanting in relation to AI, quantum, those sorts of areas. This region represents growth, basically global growth. And we recognize that. That's why it's so important for me to be coming to Southeast Asia, and I'll be here again later on in the year. And of course, the Prime Minister Starmer, is pretty engaged as well. So that's a great question, and it goes back to this point which we make, that Euro-Atlantic security and Indo-Pacific security are indivisible. We, of course, in Europe are NATO first, but not NATO only. And I want to emphasize that. And the growth is important here, but also what we have is development partnerships, particularly with our Australian friends, that also make a difference, where we still have a big commitment multilaterally to development across Asia.
All right, I'm going to take the privilege of asking about the last topic, which in many ways is the most important, and that is Tottenham Hotspur. Because I know David is a member for Tottenham, you're a lifelong Spurs fan. When I interviewed you in May, you were a big fan of Big Ange, as you called him, Ange Postecoglou. He went through a difficult period, Spurs went through a difficult period, but came back, won the Europa League, and then Tottenham rewarded him with the sack. What did you think of the decision to kick out Ange Postecoglou?
I like Big Ange, big personality, did great things. I went to the Bournemouth game with Jaishankar, the Indian Foreign Secretary, and I realised then, because I was in the boardroom with Daniel Levy, that he had lost confidence in Big Ange and that he might not survive. But we won a cup 17 years.
Yeah.
So that was glorious. It was really wonderful for the community in Tottenham.
Yeah.
You know, having the parade down the high road, celebrating, you know, how can I put this? My love of Spurs and my love of the Labour Party mean that I do have to accept that over my lifetime, we're losing a little more than we're winning. But it's really nice to win.
Well, on that point, it's interesting you make the connection with Labour, because I don't know if you noticed, but Ange Postecoglou said after the win of the Europa League, he quoted Paul Keating, and he quoted Paul Keating's line from the 1993 election, which Labour won against the odds, and Ange said, this one is for the true believers. Is that how it felt in Tottenham?
Definitely, definitely. So the whole point of supporting Tottenham, you know, our phrase is to dare is to do. So we're known for playing, you know, electric, exciting, fast-moving football. Doesn't mean we always win, but we entertain.
All right. Well, David, Spurs plays an entertaining style of football. You've entertained us this morning, so thank you for taking my questions on all these topics. Thank you for breaking the streak. We know you've got to go now. You're heading to Melbourne to watch the Lions win, so we wish you a nice evening, but not too nice, if you don't mind.
Thank you.
All right, and please come back.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank David Lammy.